Hello everyone. Welcome to the 8th Shiny Gathering. My name is Vedavyas and this is Andre. We both are hosting this Shiny Gathering where we talk about all things shiny. In today's edition, we talk about Teal and its wider ecosystem with our special guest, Pavel Rucki, who's a principal engineer and chief scientist at Roche. And he's responsible for one of the largest open source R-based project in the pharma industry, and we'll talk about it right here. But before we start, I'd like to remind you that you can ask your questions directed to Pavel in the YouTube chat, and we can go through them after we ask some questions that we've already prepared for him. Welcome, Pavel.
Hello everyone. Hello Andre Veda. Hello everyone who is watching this on YouTube and whoever else.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So a short intro. So my name is Paweł Rucki. I came from Poland, but I'm working in Switzerland in Basel. I'm working for Roche. This is one of the biggest pharma companies out there in the field called clinical trials. This is very specific domain where there is a very specific data requirements and the requirements for the analysis. I joined Roche 2019, I guess, working previously as a contractor, and then I switched for a permanent position here. My role, like since the very beginning, I'm working for the so-called Nest project that is open source, and you can check out some of the products out there. And I started being developer, then I advanced to the team level position and team leader position, and now I'm a very proud, a very sexy name for this. This is called chief engineer for the whole project, which is nothing more than overarching technical design, technical implementation on the products. Obviously, I'm not that close to the code anymore. I'm not implementing the stuff, but I'm very much participating in the redesign discussions, refactors, what's next, things like that. So yeah, but still I'm considering myself as a technical guy, man on the ground who knows where to implement this something and how to do something else with our tool sets. I think it was like it's a good summary.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction. And I guess we can dive into one of the first questions that we have for you, which we are here to talk about Teal. And so, can you give an elevator pitch for Teal? What is it?
Yes, of course. So Teal is actually, if I may say, 1/3 of the scope of the project that I'm currently working on. And I tend to name it as a framework for creating the applications, Shiny-based applications for interactive data exploratory. You probably know Shiny package and Shiny apps, what they can do with this. And what we are actually doing is we are creating some helper packages on the top of the Shiny, and we are targeting data analysts, so-called statistical programmer analysts, who are the users of the package so that they can create the apps they need. Note a big difference that we are not aiming to create an application. We are not application developers and create the application and telling our users, throw me your data and we will do magic with that. What we are actually doing is that here are the tools and take them, use them. These are the guides, these are the documentations, these are the examples, so that our users are actually creating the apps they need. This is a big difference compared to what I have seen in the field already for this couple of years. Is that usually people tend to attack it from that angle that I will create an app and I will do anything. We follow a different strategy, saying that we don't actually know, we won't allocate all of the needs that our users might have. But what we can do is that we can target some baseline and create some tools to lower the bar a little bit for some entry level R programmers to create the apps in essentially 10, 20 lines of code so that they can deploy and digest the data on their own. So I would say that would be it. So just small recap. It's sort of a framework for creating the apps. Teal itself alone is probably empty, sort of an umbrella type of the project that you actually need to put some other features in order to make it work. There are some good guides, good examples available, so I can redirect all the interested person into that. But yeah, I would say that would be a good summary. Obviously, if you wanted to know more, there is like you can very easily find it on GitHub. There is a great R consortium talk about that, which Donny and Chandy presented more from the business perspective. So that could be very beneficial from the folks from pharma industry, but not only, I would say.
Okay, that's a very long but very interesting elevator, I would say. Um, what are some unique features of Teal that set it apart from other similar tools out there?
Yeah, good question. So, like I said, know your customer first. So, our users are statistical programmer analysis that's usually coming from the SAS world, which R is trying to somehow trying to replace, at least in pharma. So we are facing some entry-level programmers usually, and there are some clever minds, obviously, we know already, and we are talking to them. But the target group is relatively new to our programming, so the goal is to set the entry bar very very low. So one of the feature is that it should be extremely easy to use. That's one of the goals. The second one, which is very critical for pharma, is so-called reproducibility. So if you got an output, whatever it could be table or plot. It's very important to preserve the source code that produces it, so as to recreate it on a data refresh, for instance, because there are some cases where the users, our analysts, face some data refresh on some regular basis. So it's important to came up with some plots, with some visualizations, so that it will be easier to recreate. So one of the core feature of the Teal apps is the reproducibility. If you open the app of our modules that we provide, we have this small show R code button on that will present you the code behind each of the visualizations we have. And that is something unique that I haven't seen this in the wild. The interesting part is that was the very first, let's say, prototype of it that would make POSIT folks to came up with Shiny Meta project. So that was inspired on what we have actually achieved a few years back. Yeah, I would say this is this reproducibility thing that is very, very, very unique. This, let's say, data exploration apps.
Okay.
Does
I haven't
the
heard about the Shiny Meta project. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, of course. So actually, you can see this in the recognition that one of the leaders of at that time, Adrian, was recognized as a very as the one who got inspired them to write it down. Um, I guess this is discontinued for now. I haven't seen an active development these days, but that was the intention to kind of provide this kind of functionality for the common use. Yeah, and that was a funny story that actually we inspired such an influential, let's say, creators to create this kind of features in the core.
And this reproducibility shows only the code to build up the plot, or also the data manipulations that are being performed on the
So both,
original data.
both has been anticipated. So obviously, this includes the data loading part, saying from where the raw data comes. Then there is like a we call it a pre-processing. So only modifications that are on the top of that. So you can see this like pull the data from the database, then manipulate, create some columns if it's needed, create some relabel, relevel, reorder if needed, create some new variables. And so this is the pre-processing part, and this is like a pure analytics part, which is the create some tables, create some graphs, apply some different calculations and modeling out there. It's very simple when we are describing, but that actually has a lot of implications on how we write the analysis, because the Teal essentially is like interactive code generation, which is every time you interact with the widgets available, it has some impacts on the code. So we have to store the code and then evaluate the code and present the results of the evaluation alongside the source of the code behind this output. Yeah, it has some significant implications on how to write the models, but if it's needed, you need to follow some strict rules, but sometimes it's not. Hence, there is like you can choose a complete, let's say, free part, let's say, free strategy, and might choose not to use it. This is like extreme flexibility on that regard.
That sounds fantastic for clinical trials and for reproducibility, and to be able to not only look at the data in the application but also reproduce it in your local computer.
Yeah, and that's actually in line with what I have just said about the targeting the base, because at some point we reached internally some conclusions that we want, let's say, create the tool that will satisfy all the needs that our users will have. So it was important, and it is still important to stop on some baseline, present the code, and suggest the end users to tweak it further. Because without this, end users will only have some graphic files that are not very modifiable. But if they are equipped with the code, they can take it and start from there. That's actually one of the nice features of the Teal apps.
And satisfying all the needs your users have, that's a very ambitious goal.
It is.
And did this reproducibility came from the start? Can you maybe talk a bit about the evolution of Teal over the years, and how were the different phases of Teal?
Yeah, of course. So actually, I was recently trying to track some Git metadata, GitHub metadata, and I have some very recent, very fresh and accurate data about that. So the very first commit for the Teal itself date back at 2017. I don't even know Roche at that time, and I didn't even know that I will be working on that. So almost a decade back. But that was a prototype. It was non-active since then for quite a while. But then things get up into the speed. And in 2019, the whole project got founded internally. And that was the moment when I started, when I started working on the project. At that time, it was, I guess, only 3 developers. So we were setting some, Git flow rules, how to cooperate, what's the idea behind the documentation, things like that. So very, very basic stuff. And nevertheless, there was some base that is kind of seems to work, and there were some ideas how to enhance it, and we were forming some development team around that product. But not only, actually, Teal was let's say half of the scope at that point in time, and we were slowly progressing. In 2021, the repository, we switched the repository into public GitHub, and that was the moment of open sourcing our code base. So first part of the year 2021, we open sourced the code base, Teal alongside the other products of ours. 2022, 1 year later, our efforts has been recognized internally. We won some award. The name won't tell you anything, but our efforts has been recognized internally, and that was a nice moment on the project. And also at roughly about the same time, the very first FDA submission, some of you might know the details, also was based on FDA. So that was a very big moment where the FDA accepts the R-code submission, interactive app, and that app was Teal-based app. So that was a great achievement. And now 2023, this year, is a moment of a lot of marketing, a lot of buzz around the Teal itself. We got a number of workshops, number of presentations internally, externally, and even though we were open source for quite a while, we got a lot of attention, and a lot of people from many other companies reach out to us with some help, with some collaborations, ideas, and stuff. So it's extremely successful year when it comes to the marketing and expanding beyond internal user base. Just to mention a few, our consortium talk, the Fuse conferences in Europe and US. We were on the biggest R technical conferences such as POSIT, User, R in Pharma, also ShinyConf, and others. So yeah, it was a buzzy year. And there are still like a lot of things to do from the technical side, but at least from that perspective, it's getting much very into the speed. From tech, so yeah, I would say that's more or less how the project evolves, and let's see what the future brings.
Great. I can see that it's a very large journey, and we are still at the early stages of it, from what I can see through the ambitions. What are the biggest lessons and challenges you've faced so far?
Oh, it's a big question and good one. It's very difficult to point one or two items. So from the technical perspective, which I'm much more closer, is that also based on the previous question, that actually the project is really big and really long. Hence, it's very important to make some meaningful and very well thought through design decisions. So this is something that I keep talking to the dev folks, developers internally, is that design is something that matters. And usually we have a lot of brainstorming sessions when it comes to the prototyping new things or refactoring new things. We involve many folks to the discussions to raise something that they don't like or they do like. Things sometimes got very hard for the author of the prototype if they hear that a lot of people don't like something. Even myself, I'm working on some prototype of the functionality, and on my own I'm very let's say very critique about some of the ideas, and I can throw something to the trash just because of that. So I would say you have to spend a lot of time designing, because if for some of the, let's say, experienced AI programmers, I guess we most of us will already reached some kind of level of expertise that we are capable of writing anything. It just that thing needs to be very meaningful and would have to bring a lot of value to the end users. And we have to put a lot of time and effort to make it really meaningful and really bulletproof and low cost, let's say, of low maintenance cost, things like that. So that's the lesson that we learn. Obviously, there are more things like automate everything, basically. If you're on the such a big project and you have a lot of documentations, gallery types of the projects, also some extensions, things like that, it's very important not to lose the time to retest and revalidate on the, let's say, downstream changes. So it's important to automate and everything what can be automated, so that the developer's time can be spent on the meaningful things, not to re-executing some testing scripts over and over again. The next thing is efficient project setup. So this is not very technical, but I guess this is really important. A key factor to success is to essentially have a good project setup where we split the responsibilities, right? Where the team members feel engaged, empowered, have some, let's say, degrees of freedom. Usually when I'm on the recruiting conversations, I keep telling that we are not actually looking for the code monkey who will just sit and wait for listen and type everything we told. We are looking for some creative people who can raise their own ideas, who can escalate sometimes some of the points that they think it's not really let's say good for the project and for the team. So it's important to build some good, efficient and healthy teams. And the funny thing is that when I was at the team lead position, we even had have some happiness indicators. So I asked the team members to state how happy they are on the iterative process, and we agreed before that we will put some actions, whatever it is, if it falls below some certain value if some we will observe some relative big drop in this. It was quite funny. I do recall my friend from my previous job saying that the worst type of management is unhappiness management, so we tend to avoid that, and we tend to build some happy and performing team. I think it's also a big lesson out of this project.
Okay, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Those two, happiness and performance, are tightly connected. Yeah, you mentioned that there was a big milestone with the FDA accepting a Teal application, interactive application. Can you provide or can you talk about like what current teams are using Teal? What teams are currently using Teal in their projects, either internally or externally at.
Yeah, sure. So internally, I have to recommend maybe to some of you is that internally we applied some kind of very clever technique or some very efficient ceremony called reverse demo. So usually the demo is like the developers presenting new features, new products to the end users and saying, "Hey, this is new. You can do magic in that button. You can do another magic in that button." So that's the demo. We follow reverse demo. So we invite the end users to the developers, talk to the developers to present the use case. And that's the moment where we actually listen and learn how the tool are being used. And sometimes the end, let's say, the usage is very surprising. So for instance, one example was that a colleague from different department uses Teal for data validation. So they actually don't use analytical models. They make use of the so-called data connectors to pull the data into the application and have some custom built data validation indicators, and they trigger some kind of code and have the results presented in the interactive way. We haven't actually anticipated that use case, but that was actually coming from the use case. Also, yet another example is that there is a very clever guy, also from a different department, who extended Teal and presented some extension that was, let's say, motivation for us to create a so-called Teal reporter. So to clip the results that you have and download everything at the end of the user session. That was also very inspiring. But usually it is used for the, let's say, interactive data exploration sometimes instead of creating many other regulatory outputs. So note the use case. So we are in the pharma industry, and in the field of clinical trials, the main goal is to create so-called TLGs, tables, listings, and graphs. Those are, we call it regulatory outputs. And there are hundreds of them, that's the truth. And we tend to, our North Star goal is to somehow replace this tedious process of creating hundreds of calls in case I'm interested in just one, right? So usually the use case is that people want to preview the outputs before they make this regulatory run, this typical standard regulatory process. And that includes some, for instance, this subpopulation analysis. That was the reason behind the so-called filter panel, is that people can very easily filter the data, slice and dice the data into a particular subpopulation, and see the regulatory output just for this subset of the data. That's a typical use. Another typical use is so-called pooled data analysis. So the things that I previously described is about one study, but sometimes people are interested in seeing the outcomes of multiple studies. So they pull multiple study data sets and see some patterns, see some characteristics, see some population, subpopulation analysis. Those are the those are the typical use case. Oh, I just recalled some unusual, let's say, yet another unusual use case that was also inspired for the let's say part of the product, that during the COVID times, uh, statisticians are very interested in the patient level, let's say, figures or indicators. So those are not grouped analysis compared some arms. It was about seeing the characteristics of that individual guy who has this adverse event, for instance. And one person create many visualizations and call it a patient profile, and that was very welcomed by the community, our internal community, and that was the reason behind the so-called patient profile modules in one of the module packages that we have. So we decided to take it, enhance it a little bit, and be an integral part of our product set. So yeah, many different use cases. Some of them are standard, some of them are not standard, and we actually don't even know some of the non-standard. Yet another story, if I may. A few months
Go ahead.
ago, I was on the user China local event. I was invited to have some kind of short speech around what has been recently developed in Teal, and there were some presentations. Oh, kill me! I forgot the name of the author of that presentation, but they essentially identify some gaps on the models. So they rewrite almost everything, sort of create some fork out of that, and create their custom models out of that. And that is a grassroots type of the activities, even outside of our company, that had happened already. So that's surprising in a lot of, let's say, dimensions, but also rewarding that this has been seen and used in an intended way.
I think that shows the power of open source. Please go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention that I see that there's a willingness to integrate those changes from the community, from that patient profile module. And I was wondering if in that user are from China, was there any integration that came from that, or some patch
Not yet, but we will see in the future. So I guess we have some kind of sort of a Teal Gallery repository. That's the product that intends to somehow collect those kind of use case, and if a person is willing to open source and present the outcome, that we let's say created a dedicated platform, dedicated space to store this kind of initiatives, examples for the wider community to see, use, and learn something out of that.
Okay. I've heard that a good product always has a product owner who has the power to say no so that the product is better. But I can imagine that having a big product is also a curse, not only a boon. And I can imagine that there might be a lot of good feature requests and normal feature requests, and Teal Reporter, as you mentioned, is one of the best feature requests, I would imagine. And similar to that, how do you strike a balance between adding advanced functionalities and keeping it still user friendly?
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. That's actually that's actually the main root of the issue here, and why are we here? Uh, there is no good answer to that, and we have to constantly balance the complexity and use ease of the use. Just to recall, one of the first questions out there is that we are targeting to cover the base and equip the end users to take the R code and proceed from there for the further extensions, because there will be always requests such as, I don't like those labels, we need to rotate those labels because they are too long, and we will not predict all of the use cases, all the possible use cases. I actually might have something that is aimed to address this kind of thing, but it's not there on the code base. But we are thinking about this from the technical perspective, is something that I'm involved in, but also from the business perspective. That's the project setup that I was referring to. So here in our project, we tend to organize the stuff from 2 dimensions, which is business and technical. And we tend to assess all of those feature request ideas, things like that, from that to end goals, I would say. So once it's past the business, let's say, assessment, that the business owner will say, okay, this makes sense, and I can see some benefits for the general. We'll try to design the stuff so that it will not destroy all of those things, and it is still on of general use. So that's the let's say approach that we tend to implement, is that every time we see a very specific user request, and that's actually nothing wrong. People are very close to the data and have very concrete requirements, and they are very connected to the details about this particular use case. We tend to see the stuff from the wider angle, and try to address it so that it will be beneficial for the wider use. From the technical perspective, this is sort of achieved by layered architecture. Layered means that the most complicated part is, and most flexible, most powerful, is on the bottom. This is still, let's say, accessible by the end users, but for the non-expert users, we tend to build on the top the convenience layers, much more simpler, but probably less powerful. And we can even have multiple, let's say, layers on the top, so that we will still allocate the typical standard end users. Those are on the top. But if there are some experts, they are free to reach out the bottom layer and interact with that. That's let's say, definitions of the layered architecture, and I believe we follow this for some of the features we have, and that will also help to address the issue that there are some clever minds out there who wanted to tweak the stuff, achieve something more, and there are lots of people who just wanted to analyze the data and don't spend time on writing the app code, which is totally okay, right?
And where would be the best place to place those requests, or to, if for developers that want to start to contribute to Teal, how can they start?
Yeah, a very good question, very important ones. First of all, if you don't know how to behave, just reach out to the human, and any one of us can guide you. At the very end of the, let's say, feature request phase, it has to be on the GitHub. So it has to end on the, let's say, code modifications, and code is on GitHub, and any code modifications is connected to the issue. So we have to have an issue. But I do understand that there is sometimes it's a very long journey to have a good issue for the developers to start with. So we have this project setup that I described previously, of the business owner as well as technical owner. So if if anyone is interested in submitting some idea, question, or whatever, it's important to make an action, and we will redirect it to appropriate person. And there are multiple channels available. So first of all, very close to my heart, it is GitHub, because that's the place that I spend most of my time. But I do understand that this might be a new tool for some of you. That's why we are achievable definitely via email, LinkedIn, or even Slack channel. So actually, Slack is the place that we tend to invite all of those people for questions, for staying update, even for interacting with the developers. There were some cases where people approach with some very specific questions, and we can redirect this question to the developer who are recently very close to this particular space, and provide some help, provide some feedback, answer your questions. So if anyone is interested and don't know how to start, I would recommend to ask this question on the Slack. We will redirect. But other than that, there are tons of good documentations. We put a lot of effort into that. So you can find it very easily on the GitHub. And there is a very nice convention of the packages of the so-called Getting Started article. So I'm an average Joe. I just wanted to try out some stuff, guide me. So this is type of the documentation available almost everywhere in our products.
Okay. One last question before we go to the Q&A from the audience. Recently, I've noticed that many pharma companies are attempting to open source their software, and I'm sure you've encountered various challenges in doing so. Can you discuss some of those challenges and how you overcame them?
Oh, that's a good question. So that's actually a very interesting times to live in, at least for the pharma, because we have seen, and we are actually seeing and experiencing a massive shift towards open source projects. There are lots of commitments from Roche and from other companies about openly sharing the code base, agreeing on some common conventions, and that's something that I really love about, is that I do remember one sentence from some of the directors from the companies, not from Roche, is that industry and pharma companies are willing to compete on the molecules, not on the tools. And that's something very close to my heart, and really inspiring sentence, and that show off some kind of shift. So I'm not gonna lie, it was easy because that had happened, like I said, 2 years ago, and that was quite long. We were one of the very first products that has been very commonly open source, and we were targeting for this community-driven development. We have, let's say, we received a lot of help internally on that regard, and that even ends up in internal open sourcing office that provides some kind of guidance, legal advice on some open sourcing activities, whether can I use the open source product or not, what should I do in order to open source my work. That is all available, at least in my company. So we have received a lot of help, and we set up some ground for the future projects that follows our, let's say, way of open sourcing, which was quite nice.
Okay. We have one question from Ivana. She asks, what are the specific benefits that Roche has seen after implementing Teal?
That's a good question. So we actually don't have any metrics that I can say that it dropped from 10 to 5, whatever it is. But we try to monitor this via talking to the end users, talking to the community, to the leaders of the groups, and we have received a very positive feedback that sometimes the time to spin on the application to get some, let's say, digestible results significantly drops, whatever it means. I'm a data guy, so sometimes I wanted to see some kind of metrics, but it's very difficult to get this tangible data, this objective data. But for sure we are targeting, and I feel that we achieve this as a lowering the time to up, if I may say that. Also there's some indirect goals, which I'm kind of seeing this as a payoff, is that internally we have some called a dedicated team working on the regulatory, let's say, products, and that includes some internal rotations. What does it mean? Is that people, let's say, who are willing to upskill on the programming are joining our project on rotation for a certain period of time. It could be half a year or year, upskill and learn a lot about some good development practices, leave the project and apply that knowledge elsewhere. And recently I have chatted with my colleague of mine, and he said that who left the project, and he said that he applied this and this on his new project that he is in currently, which is great thing, because the indirect goal behind the whole product, whole, let's say, project, Teal, and not only, is about upskilling the internal community, upskilling internal people for our programming, for good development practices, and that's, I think, that has been achieved already. But on the other hand, it's difficult to measure. I just know it from talking to people and from my own observation.
Right. Circling back to the layered architecture that you talked about, users can be in different layer of understanding or skill level, if you will. So what would be the required skills necessary to be, let's say, a Teal app developer?
Teal app developer. Yeah, good naming. I don't know if you have done this intentionally or not, because it was for the documentations and things like that. It is quite a challenge to categorize the audience, because we tend to distinguish between the module developer and app developer. Those are two different people. So the app developer, actually the entry bar is much lower than the module developer. So the app developer, I don't think it is required that much. What needs to be done for sure is that the app developer needs to configure the input data, sort of database connection, which tables, which let's say ID to pull the data. Then obviously the modules, some of the modules are very easy to configure, some of the modules are not so easy, depending on the use case. But I don't think it is super challenging, at least on that perspective. For the app developers, we are aiming to be as easy as possible. Things get more complicated when it comes to the module developers, so that requires some kind of knowledge in order to apply this reproducibility stuff, to include the output to the reporter engine. But it's not rocket science at the very end of the day. There are some good examples available on this gallery. There are good documentations. We put a lot of effort into simplifying this and make it super easy. So I hope that it's not that much, but we will have to see.
Great. We did have one more question, but Donnie was here to help with the answer. And I think even you mentioned about the conference in China where you got some constructive feedback. But apart from that, are there any other instances where this happened which influenced further development?
Yes, definitely. So this reverse demo that I mentioned, that is a great example that we have, you know, lots of notes, lots of feedback, and that most of them are being able to end up in the backlog, and sometimes even already achieved, delivered. So that's one of the recurrent platform to share the feedback, and those are most of the time very constructive. Other than that, we are in constant, let's say, feedback loop with so-called our power users. So we know the people who tend to extend, tend to step a little bit beyond what's standard approach, and those people impact our pipeline in a sense that they shed some light on what's actually missing. And I had to, for instance, I had to put a lot of effort into doing blah blah blah. It will be great if you can guys simplify this and this. That was a very good constructive feedback. So every time we have conversations with our end users, we tend to make it as constructive, as detailed as possible, then going for this business and technical assessment, and then for design and the implementation. So it's not like we are following one man ideation. We targeted this to be a community driven development. So we take, let's say, all of the feedbacks from the community, from the user base, obviously apply some filters then, and have it at the very end of the day on our pipeline. Yeah. So there were many cases where we received this, and I think that we made our job good on that regard.
So I think there are no more questions.
I do have one more question, maybe before we wrap up. Can you talk briefly about the future of Teal? You mentioned how you raise feedback.
That's interesting. So we are very close to the releasing Teal on CRAN. So some of our packages are already there. We are heavily refactoring right now the input data layer. So how to input the data into the Teal. I mean, the most complicated use case of the interactive data inputation. If you have the data in the memory, you can do as usual. But once we are done, which is target even this year in the optimistic scenario, this calendar year, we will be targeting to pushing everything on CRAN. So that's a big milestone to achieve. Then we probably will be this is to be discussed, but more or less the plan is pretty much agreed. Is that there's few initiatives and we need to prioritize them accordingly. There is a idea to simplify or to rethink the way how to configure the modules. Also, a feedback that we have heard from yet another company is to apply some decorations on the outputs. So if you have plots or tables, it would be nice to have some kind of further tweaks and for the tweaks at the very end of this before it goes into the GUI. There is an initiative to enhance a little bit UX and UI of the core of the product that we also need to closely think and refine it well. Yeah, and there are more other smaller refactors that I probably don't want to go through the details, but we are actually very actively discussing the pipeline for the next year. But the target would be to basically simplify the stuff, make it more basic, make it more accessible, opens for the another use case. So if it happens that people tend to have weird workarounds around let's say some of the issues, we are targeting to return some more basic structure to go back to the basics so that it could be very easily modified then. So yeah, CRAN, and let's see what next.
Sounds awesome. And so that wraps up our insightful conversation with Paweł Rucki, shedding light on the fascinating journey of Teal, from its initial development in 2017 to its current path towards CRAN. And we've covered a spectrum of topics, from its unique features, setting it apart, to the challenges faced during open sourcing and the valuable lessons learned along the way. I really enjoy the quote on the pharma industry willingness to compete on the molecules and not on the tools. So, as a personal side note, so both me and Veda, we give a huge thank you to Paweł Rucki for sharing his expertise and experiences with us today. It's been an enriching discussion, and we encourage our listeners to explore Teal on GitHub and on the Slack channel over at Pharmaverse. But before we say our goodbyes, we have two exciting announcements to share with our listeners. Firstly, get ready for the next Shiny Gathering with a special virtual edition of Shiny Trivia. We had a lot of fun on the first one during the POSIT conference, and we're doing it again on the next gathering on Tuesday, December 19th. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And secondly, mark your calendars for the upcoming Shiny conference taking place from April 17th to the 19th, maybe with a presentation about Teal or a workshop about Teal. Next week, we will open the call for papers, so feel free to submit your ideas. Don't miss out on this opportunity to give a talk and join the vibrant Shiny community, engage with experts, and explore the latest developments in the world of Shiny. Keep an eye on the official site. It's shinyconf.com. That's it for the announcements. Until next time, thank you for joining us on Shiny Gatherings. I'd like again to thank Pavel for his time and this fantastic conversation. We encourage our listeners to drop by the Slack channel in the links below and continue the discussion there. Stay curious and stay inspired.
Thanks.